Various South African municipalities have raised concerns around some aspects of the AARTO Act as amended. The law in its current form gives the Road Traffic Infringement Authority all the rights to handle fines and traffic violations. Now, the argument from municipalities is that the legislation affects their collection of revenue. For more on this conversation, we're joined by MasterDrive Managing Director Eugene Herbert. Eugene, a very good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Quina, and to the viewers.
I mean, let's look at the AARTO Act as amended at this point. I mean, municipalities already talking about how this will affect their revenue. Does this effectively come down to that, to the money issue?
Well, I think in many ways, and if I can maybe just go back to why AARTO in concept is such a good thing, because I think let's not forget that there was good intentions, and that should be with the overall view to improving road safety. The fact, however, is that because it's been in its in gestation period for over 20 years makes it a little bit more complicated. Now, there has been a number of changes, which is why we're running a webinar for most of our corporates in the next while, as to give them an understanding of where we sit currently. And while certain aspects of it or phases of the Act have been kicked down the line, it still has to be proclaimed by the state president. And what the municipalities are saying, and in fact there's two sides to it from my perspective. Yes, it would appear that their revenues are going to be impacted on, but you kind of question whether or not they should have been budgeting for the fact that they would derive revenue from fines, traps, etc., etc. Now, the way we see it is the fact that these municipalities could be impacted revenue because by the time it's collected through the RTIA and then finally distributed to the respective municipalities, there could be a bit of time. Now, we know that many of these are not run too well in the first instance, so that could have an impact, not necessarily from a funding point of view from our perspective, but in how they are now going to run their municipalities with regard to law enforcement. The purpose of law enforcement should be to make our roads safer. So when they're now going to be constricted, maybe they're going to deploy resources in other areas, or they will have to get rid of authorities or traffic officials that could be responsible for managing road safety on our roads, there could be some compromises to be had over there. And of course, you and I know that there's always the financial component where we know that some traffic officials take lunch money or cool drink. And so there's that component of somebody paying money to an official in order not to get any demerit points on their licenses.
Quite a number of things that I want us to touch on, but I mean, to my point and my question earlier on, and you touched on it, that shouldn't the priority then be to maintain law and order on our roads for road traffic, for AARTO, instead of the financial aspect of it, because it almost sounds like there is a shade of grey in between.
Quina, I think your observation is quite correct from 2 points of view. The purpose of it should be laws are there to protect road users, both pedestrian and vehicles and their drivers. But somehow or other, it always seems to get into this area where, and sad to say, all things have not been thought through thoroughly. Now, given the fact that this goes back to 1998, we're talking of 20-odd years. Phase 2 of AARTO Act has now been deferred down the line because some aspects of it are not entirely clear with regard to how they're going to be deployed or how it's going to work. So I know that you cannot expect perfection, but if the municipalities who are responsible for the areas which we drive through on the roads that we travel, and I'm talking about passenger vehicles, trucks, etc., are disempowered by not having money to deploy the necessary resources to police the roads, it is going to have an impact on road safety. And, we kill 15,000, 16,000 people on our roads every year. And we should be concerned that the situation could get worse. See what happened in December over the festive season, and it was admirable that there was a reduction in the number of fatalities on the road, 2.7% or something like that, I think. But we should be, in terms of the United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety, 2030, they want to reduce that by 50%. So are we putting in place laws and legislation that's going to help it, or hinder it. And I trust that by the time it is successfully deployed, or let's put it this way, deployed with limited success, we will see some positive things.
Eugene, we'll continue our conversation with Eugene Herbert, MasterDrive Managing Director, and just on the issue of municipalities and the new driving laws. Eugene, to some of the points that you were making earlier on, I mean, in terms of law enforcement, and this is something that has been in the pipeline for a while. Where do you think it's missing? I mean, yes, it still has to be promulgated by the president to come into full effect. But what are some of the elements that you think are missing to make it fully effective, lack of a better phrasing?
Well, I think that if we relying purely on the demerit system, which is license points are deducted, and the maximum is 15, by which time your license is suspended for a period of time. It's very punitive, and I accept that aspects of it are necessary. However, when you speak to the number of individuals, and we speak with both drivers and corporates, the ignorance that relates to it, it's purely seen as a money-making operation for the traffic officials on the side of the road who can now extort more money from motorists. Now, remember, that's two-sided, eh? It's irreprehensible that they should even think of doing that. But what about the motorist who is now driving, and they've made one of few, and there's relatively easily to connect some demerit points, the easiest of which would be speeding. And we know because that can be done by way of cameras, etc. And the sad thing about it is that if a person is dependent on their having a license or being able to drive for a living, are they dependent on it? Would they be inclined to want to offer something to make the problem go away? Now, that is also wrong. We cannot accept the fact that a driver should bribe anyone. So the fact is that we always believe that should take into account, how do we appeal to the motorist to behave themselves better on the roads? The fact that we kill so many people is an indication that South African drivers, take for example drinking and driving. We know it is a major issue in South Africa, and yet, for example, at a corporate level, at the end of the year, they will have parties and they will encourage or allow their staff to drink. Now, the responsible ones say, no, we may have alcohol, but we will ensure that our staff get home safely. So South Africans in general should accept greater responsibility for their behavior on the roads. It's not just up to laws to make sure that we drive better. Yes, of course, zero tolerance with regard to drinking and driving. It should also be with regard to distracted while driving. The cell phone against the ear, because one reputable source says that in one insurer, 60% odd of crashes are because of people using cell phones. So when South Africans decide to act responsibly, we will see a natural decline in road accidents, road fatalities, and the like. And in the meantime, we've got to hopefully manage this precarious pathway that we walk in with regard to AARTO and look for positive outcomes.
So would then the punitive measures of demerit be more effective in comparison to paying a fine or simply offering cool drink to that official?
Well, look, please bear in mind there is in most instances, except where there's a no admission of guilt, there are fines attached to those, and if you pay within a certain period of time, there's a 50% reduction. But bearing in mind, and here's one of the challenges that I think was not foreseen because we didn't have the problem then, the serving of notices, etc., has got to be done through the South African Post Office. That's one of the areas. Now, you and I both know that that institution is in a sad state, and how can any individual who is going to be issued with the summons or with an offence know that they're going to get it on time and therefore deal with the issue timelessly? But there are some good things, and part of what has been put aside for now, there was very strict punitive measures for companies, and many companies faced major challenges. It's now focused on drivers, and because of the way AARTO works, it's not just the person in the company that it's a company vehicle that will just accept responsibility and pay it because there was no demerit points attached to it. Offenders, the drivers themselves, will be forced to deal with those, and we trust that maybe there's an improvement in driver behavior. But here's a challenge that we have for companies. You and I, or I, for example, let's use me as an example, may incur demerit points driving my own vehicle. I don't incur any on while driving for the company, but I could still have my license suspended even though I wasn't driving for business. So that could impact on business. So I do think that there's many facets that haven't been explored to the nth degree, put it that way, and as a result seen the impact on the economy, people's livelihoods. You know the challenges with getting the driver's license today. Can you imagine if a person's license is taken away and they've got to go through the whole process again? I think there's things that haven't been thought through very well. But on the other hand, if we see demerit systems works in other parts of the world where people are so concerned that they will lose their license, they are almost forced into behaving themselves on the roads, as they should be, because speed limits are not there to penalize us. They are there for reference guides to make sure traffic flows smoothly and, of course, to keep us safe on the road.
So the AARTO impact report, as we touched on when we started the conversation, Eugene, is that municipalities are noting some of those aspects, and we touched on the financial losses that they may incur in this regard. Is there a way then that a balance could be found in that respect? I mean, you mentioned even the issue of collections of the money, how the cities would recoup some of those monies and so on and so forth. Is there a way that some sort of balance could be found, like a win-win situation of sorts between AARTO and municipalities?
Quina, if all things work perfectly, I do think it would be a win-win, because if the system worked correctly, the fines were paid, and here's another challenge that you have, vehicles on the e-Natus system where owners have the information where they're going to deliver it in order to be able to serve the summons and get money paid in. That's not perfect. So in a perfect system or near perfect system, you commit an offence, you get a fine, you pay 50% of it, the money goes to RTIA, and a portion of it goes back to the municipality. In that type of scenario, it works well. But you and I know that in government operations, nothing ever works perfectly. And our primary concern is, and to reiterate what I said at the beginning, the fact that the municipalities may not be run too well, the fact that they have banked or budgeted for receiving income, and therefore, here's the sort of irony, if all road users behave themselves, well, maybe those municipalities would be bankrupt in any case, because if they were banking on money to fund their operations, they wouldn't have that money. So it's almost like a catch-22. You want people to behave themselves because we want to improve road safety. But if they did, it would impact on the financial resources of those various municipalities. And I think in that report, if you have a look, Swellendam, is it Swellendam? They projected they would lose something like over 3 million rand or something like that. Now, that's a lot of money for a relatively small municipality. But I do think, and let's kind of finish off on a fairly positive note, if there's greater education, and that's one of the purposes that we engage on webinars, etc., to help people understand what the challenges are. It does mean that we need to change behavior. And if there's things that we can educate people about, certainly younger drivers, and help them to understand the implications of it. Some of the programs that I'm involved in from an NPO, we educate school children, because they are our leaders and our drivers of tomorrow, and their lives, they're the most vulnerable. So we want to protect them to the extent that's possible. And if we view that and think of driving not as a right, but as a responsibility when you get your license, maybe we can see a turnaround in attitudes in both municipalities and in drivers, and we trust, and maybe against all hope, that the RTIA will see sense.
Just finally, and very briefly, if I may, Eugene, you sort of touched on the point that I wanted us to touch on. At the end of the day, as drivers, it should be our responsibility to maintain road safety, not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the people. But then again, as you touched on it again, for municipalities, if they're talking this and looking at this from a financial perspective, if we all behave, then they won't be making any money.
Yes. Well, okay, so let's just explore another scenario. The cost to the fiscus at the moment, because of road crashes and etc., is, I think, around about 200 billion a year. Now, if we didn't have those crashes, surely there would be more money available to distribute through whatever means. And my first choice would be to healthcare systems and the education system. But let's assume that were available to fund some of the municipalities. So it's not all bad news. We mustn't look at it and say we bank on that, because the benefits to the economy in terms of lives saved, and there could be other sources of revenue for those municipalities by deploying them more effectively. I do think that they could still survive effectively, but it does mean that they're going to look at the way they've been doing things and say, we can't continue. Einstein's definition of stupidity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So let's accept that we don't want to be stupid, that we want to change things, and therefore we will find ways. Mankind is ingenuitive. They will find ingenious ways of dealing with whatever adverse challenges they face. And I think if you and I can take the lead in setting an example and talking about matters that are close to the heart of those who really care and who want to make a difference on our roads, we can achieve some success.
Fantastic, Eugene. Thank you so much for coming through to speak to us. I appreciate your time. Eugene Herbert, MasterDrive Managing Director, talking to us there as we look at the report, the AARTO report about municipalities complaining that they might lose some revenue.